This podcast details true crime cases. It contains adult themes and may contain descriptions of violence. It is not intended for children. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for this bonus episode of Once Upon a Crime. This is the last episode of Season 8. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for listening, subscribing, and following, and telling others about Once Upon a Crime. My listeners have made it possible for Lorena and me to have a job we absolutely love. We hope to bring you more great true crime stories for many years to come. Having covered hundreds of true crime cases, not to mention consuming scores of true crime books, documentaries, and shows, one thing has become clear. While law enforcement officers, investigators, and the courts work tirelessly to put the bad guys behind bars and keep us all safe, sometimes people get away with crimes and go unpunished. A series I covered in Season 6, titled Getting Away with Murder, took a look at people who went scot-free after causing the demise of another. In my series, one factor was common in all three. They were all wealthy and/or powerful. In 2015, a true crime documentary series debuted on HBO and immediately became a sensation. It was titled The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. The Jinx, directed by Andrew Jarecki, told the story of Robert Allen Durst, the son of an uber-wealthy real estate family in New York. Durst's wife Kathie went missing in 1982, and Durst was suspected of being involved in her disappearance. In the year 2000, his good friend Susan Berman was shot and killed execution-style in her Beverly Hills home. The Jinx follows Durst as he becomes a suspect in Berman's murder, which brings renewed interest in looking at his possible involvement in Kathie's disappearance. The Jinx ends with a shocking revelation and Robert Durst's imminent arrest for Berman's murder. The Jinx Part 2 was just released as a follow-up to the 2015 hit and will conclude this weekend, Sunday, May 26th, with the 6th episode. The Durst case has fascinated me from the time I first learned about it, and I've watched and read everything I could find on Robert Durst, but I'm primarily a fan of The Jinx, and so I was so excited to watch Part 2. I highly recommend watching The Jinx if you have not yet done so. It's a thrilling ride from beginning to end. But enough gushing over The Jinx from me. I took it from another angle when I covered Robert Durst's story in Season 6. In between the disappearance and suspected murder of Kathie Durst in 1982 and the murder of Susan Berman in 2000, there was another murder Durst was involved in. Durst fled New York when the investigation into Kathie's disappearance was reopened in 1999 by the New York State Police. He landed in Galveston, Texas, and hid under an assumed name and bizarre identity. A year after he moved into town, his neighbor, Morris Black, was found dismembered, his body parts floating in the Galveston Bay. In my episode, I look at how Robert Durst got away with this gruesome murder. Here's an excerpt from episode 213 of Once Upon a Crime, Getting Away with Murder, Robert Durst. You can listen to the entire strange, twisted, unbelievable story by clicking on the link in the show notes, or just pulling up episode 213 of Once Upon a Crime in your favorite podcast app. I'm going to tackle this episode a little differently this time. As you know, I normally have a scripted story that I put together and narrate for you. This time, I'm still going to give you the whole story with all the details, but I'm going to do it a little bit more casually, more in a discussion style. I've done this every now and again, and it seems that listeners tend to enjoy it. So here we go. First of all, you may be familiar with the name Robert Durst. His name became known worldwide back in 2015 when an HBO documentary titled The Jinx was aired over 6 nights. The whole title of this 6-part documentary series was The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst. Directed by Andrew Jarecki and Mark Smerling, The Jinx would become one of the most talked about true crime documentaries of the 2000s. It would even go on to win an Emmy for Best Documentary or Nonfiction Series in 2015. In 1982, Robert Durst had been married to Kathie McCormick Durst for about a decade when she left a party at the home of a friend and disappeared. Durst became a suspect in her disappearance but was never charged with the crime. In 1999, New York State Police reopened the case. The news of this case being reopened went public the following year. That same year, in the year 2000, Robert Durst fled New York City to escape media attention. A few months later, one of Robert Durst's best friends, a woman named Susan Berman, was found murdered in her home in Los Angeles. Before long, Durst would also be named as a person of interest, but of course, with all of these things put together, we start to think something is going on here around this man. And the next part of this case is the part that I will be focusing on, and this is Robert Durst, again, has moved to another part of the country, this time to Galveston, Texas, and he will behave very strangely indeed at this time, and I'll go into those details as soon as we take a short break. Before Susan Berman was found dead, shot execution style in her home in Los Angeles, Robert Durst was in the wind, crisscrossing around the country, no longer tethered to his family's business, but with plenty of money at his disposal. In the fall of 2000, he arrived in the Gulf city of Galveston, Texas. There, the multimillionaire rented a cheap apartment in an old house that had been cut into 4 apartments, paying just $300 a month. But how he rented this apartment was the most bizarre part so far. Robert Durst, wanting to remain incognito, called up the apartment's landlord, said he was reaching out on his friend's behalf. He said the woman was unable to hear or speak. He said the woman also did not know how to use sign language, but only communicated through writing notes. So he was calling to secure this apartment for her. When this woman, Dorothy Signer, arrived to begin renting this apartment in Galveston, Texas, she cut a very strange figure. She wore large, oversized, flowery dresses and a very obvious cheap gray wig. This is how Robert Durst arrived in Galveston, pretending to be a deaf-mute woman. Now, you would imagine somebody like Robert Durst, who has access to millions upon millions of dollars, may rent a 4-star hotel under assumed name, may be able to go and purchase fake ID, go to another country, if he really wanted to get lost and he really wanted to not be recognized. But one thing you need to know about Robert Durst, by all accounts, he was extremely cheap. He didn't like to spend any money he didn't absolutely have to, although at other times he could be quite generous. But when it came to his own necessities, he would rather not pay any more than he had to. So now we've gotten to the part of this case that I want to focus on in this episode. On Sunday, September 30th, 2001, a 13-year-old boy named James Avina was fishing in the Galveston Bay. He was standing near the edge of the rocks when he noticed something floating in the water. He saw 4 silver garbage bags floating near a concrete pier, and there was something next to it that he thought was a dead pig, and he wondered what was that doing in the water. As he looked closer, he noticed that it was not a pig. It was about dusk on the Sunday evening, and James was there with his little sister Elise and his stepfather David. He called out to his stepfather, saying, "Hey, there's a body over here." What James had spied in the water was a human torso bumping repeatedly against the rocks near the shore. The police were called, and the grisly discovery was reported. When they arrived, they found a torso, no head and no limbs attached to it. They looked nearby where the torso was found floating. They also saw the garbage bags. They pulled those out of the water. When they looked inside, they found that they contained human limbs and other evidence. The legs were found in separate garbage bags, and the arms of the body were found in another. Sergeant Cody Cazales, a Galveston police detective, was assigned as lead investigator of this case. He would later say that the body parts had been found because the killer had dumped them while the tide was coming in. And he said this about that, quote, "That's how we knew we probably weren't looking for someone local. Because a person who was local to the bay would know that if you dump something in the bay as the tide was coming in, it's just going to float to the shore." He also said that the person who dumped the body parts in the bay was not very smart because they put them in trash bags that would float. He said it would have been much smarter to just dump the body parts right into the water, or they would quickly be eaten by animals and just be made to disappear. Besides the body parts found inside the garbage bags, they also found a treasure trove of evidence. Found wrapped around one of the legs was a newspaper, and affixed to it was an address label that read 2213 Avenue K, which was a local address. Also found in the bags was a receipt from a hardware store for trash bags and a drop cloth, a price tag for a paring knife, and a package for a new bow saw that were both dated on September 28th, just 2 days before the body parts were found. What they didn't find among the bags was the head of the body. That was still missing. The detective next traveled to 2213 Avenue K, the address found on the newspaper. And the details of what he found came from the book titled A Deadly Secret, The Bizarre and Chilling Story of Robert Durst, written by Matt Burbeck. 2213 Avenue K was a brown house which resembled a 2-story Cape Cod with a front porch and was located in the middle of a nondescript block. Cazales arrived with another officer and looked around the front of the house and then walked to the back. They peeked inside a trash can and found 2 trash bags that were similar to the ones that had been floating in the bay. They also found packaging for a No. 4 paring knife, a bloody sock, a Band-Aid, a Bank of America cash envelope, a .22 caliber handgun, a spent .22 shell casing, and a receipt for an eye exam made out to someone named Robert Durst. Cazales then contacted the landlord of the house, a man named Klaus Rene Dillman. He told him that he didn't know anybody named Robert Durst. There were 4 apartments in the house, and the one in the front had been rented by a 70-something-year-old man named Morris Black and a woman named Dorothy Siner, a deaf-mute who traveled often and was rarely seen. Siner, the landlord said, was a, quote, bizarre-looking, flat-chested woman who communicated by scribbling notes. She paid her rent months in advance, always in cash or money order. Now the detective went outside and looked through a front window into Siner's apartment. There he saw a drop cloth spread out on the floor. At that point, Cazales decided to obtain a warrant to search Morris Black's apartment, the older man who lived in apartment 1A. When they entered, the place was empty. Everything in the apartment was gone, including Black's clothes. The detective saw evidence that someone had mopped the kitchen floor in a hurry in an attempt to clean the apartment. The police brought in luminol and sprayed it throughout the apartment, finding a glowing, bloody trail that led from the kitchen sink, bathroom floor, sink, and shower to the carpet in the front room. They also found blood in the hallway separating Black's apartments from Dorothy Siner's. He obtained another search warrant, and the next day, on October 4th, he found Siner's place just as blood-soaked as the one across the hall. Inside, he found bloody boots, blood on the carpet, on the kitchen floor, and even on the kitchen walls. There was blood underneath the floor in the kitchen, which had seeped through a small cut in the linoleum. Police also found a bloody paring knife and a drop cloth that had been spread out in the living room. A photo of a man was found inside Siner's apartment and shown to the 2 neighbors who lived upstairs. They identified the man they knew as Robert Durst. Again, Dillman, the landlord, said he didn't know a Robert Durst. All he knew was that he had rented an apartment nearly a year before to Dorothy Siner. They now interviewed other tenants and people in the neighborhood who said that Durst had spent a lot of time in his apartment engaging in loud arguments with Morris Black. This happened almost on a daily basis, and most of the time it ended with each of the 2 men slamming their doors. But neither Dorothy Siner nor Robert Durst was anywhere around, so the investigation continues. The day after the apartments were searched and the evidence was collected, the victim whose dismembered body had been found floating in garbage bags in the bay was identified as 71-year-old Morris Black.
That will do it for this episode of Once Upon a Crime and wrap up our Best Of series. I hope you enjoyed visiting or revisiting some of the top episodes chosen by me, Lorena, and you, our listeners, over the past 8 years. There is so much more to this story. It is one of the strangest, most bizarre, and baffling crime stories I've covered. Robert Durst was a fascinating, odd, and scary man. Check out The Jinx, The Life and Deaths of Robert Durst, and let me know your thoughts. Get the link in the show notes for the full episode and the other 2 episodes in the series Getting Away with Murder. I cover a tragic death that was deemed an accident, but may have been a deliberate murder, and the story of Senator Ted Kennedy and the drowning of a young woman on Chappaquiddick Island in 1969. We're kicking off Season 9 on June 10th with a new series and 3 brand new episodes.
I'll be off for a couple of weeks to get things ready for Season 9 and to appear at CrimeCon 2024 in Nashville. Stop by Podcast Row and say hello if you attend CrimeCon from May 31st through June 2nd. Just look for me at the Once Upon a Crime booth. Grab some free goodies, take some selfies with me, and we'll talk true crime. You'll also be able to get access to the very first episode of Season 9 early. Come to the table and use your phone or tablet to grab our scan code for an exclusive early release episode. It's just our way of saying thank you for being listeners and visiting us at CrimeCon. You can still use my offer code once for your discounted ticket to CrimeCon in Nashville. I hope to see you there. Once Upon a Crime is written and produced by me, Esther Ludlow. My executive producer is Lorena Garcia. Special thanks go to our research assistant, Emma Battaglia. Until next time, be good to one another.